Alright, pay attention. Before Chelsea became a billion-dollar circus, before the Champions Leagues, before the endless chaos of signings and sackings, this club was on life support. We're talking late 90s. Chelsea weren't kings of Europe. They were a team drowning in debt, their stadium falling apart, and their future hanging by a thread. Stamford Bridge was half empty most weekends. The pitch looked like a farm field, and the club's owners were spending more time talking to banks than planning transfers. Back then, Chelsea were miles away from being called a big club. Arsenal were winning doubles, Manchester United were unstoppable, and Chelsea were just trying to stay alive. The club was so broke that the ground itself was nearly lost to property developers. The land was owned by a separate company, and when the team couldn't pay the rent, there was a real chance they'd be homeless. But then a man named Ken Bates appeared. He bought Chelsea in 1982 for the price of a used car, £1. For some reason, that's how much a used car cost back then. And to be fair, that was probably £1 too much. He wasn't buying a football club, he was buying a problem. Bates was old school, gruff, stubborn, and allergic to losing. He fought court cases, negotiated with creditors, and refused to let the club die. But it was survival, not success. For years, Chelsea scraped through seasons, occasionally finding a bit of magic from players like Kerry Dixon or Dennis Wise, only to be dragged back down by financial chaos. By the mid-90s, things looked a little brighter. The Premier League had arrived, television money started trickling in, and Chelsea began attracting bigger names. Glenn Hoddle came in as manager, Ruud Gullit followed, and suddenly the club had a bit of glamour again. When Gianluca Vialli and Gianfranco Zola showed up, fans started to dream for the first time in decades. But dreams cost money, and Chelsea were running out of it. The club's debt was skyrocketing. By the early 2000s, they reportedly owed close to £80 million. The freehold of Stamford Bridge had only recently been secured by the fan-led group Chelsea Pitch Owners in 1997, ending years of threat from developers. The truth was, Chelsea were one bad season away from collapse, and that's when it happened. A man the English press would soon nickname the Roman Empire walked in with a smile and a checkbook big enough to rewrite football forever. In July of 2003, London woke up to the kind of headline that doesn't sound real. Russian billionaire buys Chelsea. Nobody saw it coming. Roman Abramovich was 36 years old, quiet, mysterious, and rich beyond belief. Nobody really knew where the money came from, but there was a lot of it. Oil, politics, business, it didn't matter. All anyone cared about was that Chelsea were suddenly swimming in more cash than the rest of the Premier League combined. And just like that, everything changed. Overnight, Chelsea went from being a team that was nearly bankrupt to one that could buy anyone. Clubs across Europe panicked. Within weeks, Abramovich dropped more than £100 million on new players. It was football's first real spending spree. In came Claude Makelele from Real Madrid, Hernan Crespo from Inter, Damien Duff, Joe Cole, Jeremy Veron, Mutu, a brand new squad built from scratch before most people even learned how to pronounce the owner's name. But Abramovich wasn't just collecting players, he was collecting status. He wanted trophies, and he wanted them immediately. So in 2004, after just one season, he sacked the manager, Claudio Ranieri, and brought in Jose Mourinho, fresh off a Champions League win with Porto, full of arrogance, charisma, and self-belief. When Mourinho arrived at Stamford Bridge, he stood in front of the cameras and said, "Please don't call me arrogant, but I'm a European champion and I think I'm a special one." That single phrase set the tone for everything that followed. Chelsea weren't here to make friends, they were here to dominate, and they did. In Mourinho's first season, Chelsea won their first league title in 50 years, 95 points, the fewest goals conceded in Premier League history, just 15. They had pure control, then they did it again the next year, back-to-back titles. Mourinho built a machine around Terry, Lampard, Drogba, Makelele and Sech, players who became icons, legends, and villains all at once. But the empire that rises fastest often starts to crack first. Behind the scenes, Abramovich's hunger for glory was endless. He wanted more than England. He wanted Europe. And when Chelsea fell short in the Champions League again and again, his patience began to fade. Still, in just 3 years, Chelsea had gone from near bankruptcy to the most feared team in England. Mourinho was the face, Abramovich was the wallet, and the rest of the league was just trying to catch up. But this was Chelsea. Stability was never part of the plan, and sooner or later, something had to break. By 2007, the cracks had started to show. Mourinho's Chelsea were winning, but they were also burning out. His ego, Abramovich's ambition, and the pressure to finally conquer Europe were colliding like a car crash waiting to happen. And then, in September of 2007, it happened. Jose Mourinho was gone. The man who built Chelsea into a monster was suddenly out the door. Officially, it was called mutual consent, but everyone knew what it really was. Abramovich had gotten tired of the tension. Chelsea replaced him with Avram Grant, a man who had never managed at the top level, and the media laughed. But somehow, Grant took Chelsea all the way to their first ever Champions League final. Moscow, 2008, Chelsea versus Manchester United. The rain was falling, the pitch was slick, and the moment was perfect. After all the years of chasing it, Chelsea were one penalty away from European glory. John Terry stepped up, captain, leader, legend. He slipped, the ball hit the post, United won. That image, Terry crying in the rain, became the symbol of Chelsea's pain. A few months later, Grant was gone. Then came Luis Felipe Scolari, gone within 7 months. Gus Hiddink came in as caretaker, then Carlo Ancelotti. He finally brought some peace, and in 2010, Chelsea achieved something no one at the club had done before, a domestic double. They won the Premier League with 103 goals, a record at the time, and added the FA Cup for good measure. Didier Drogba scored 37 in all competitions. Lampard scored 22 in the league. It looked like Chelsea were back on top for good, but not at Chelsea. Success never lasted long. By the next season, the spark was gone. Abramovich wanted another Champions League, and when Ancelotti failed to deliver, he was gone too. Then it was Andre Villas-Boas' turn, young, fiery, called the next Mourinho. But Chelsea didn't need another Mourinho. They needed stability, and when results started to slide, the players revolted. Drogba, Terry, Lampard, all of them clashed with the new manager. By March of 2012, Villas-Boas was sacked. Roberto Di Matteo was next, a former Chelsea player, loved by the fans, doubted by the pundits. Everyone assumed he was just there to finish the season quietly. Instead, he wrote history. That spring, Chelsea were in chaos, 6th in the league, barely holding themselves together. But in the Champions League, something strange started to happen. They beat Napoli in a comeback for the ages. They took down Benfica. Then they faced Barcelona, the unbeatable team, peak Messi, peak Xavi, peak Iniesta, and somehow survived. 10 men at the Camp Nou. Fernando Torres threw on goal. Barcelona's nightmare. And just like that, Chelsea were in the final again. Munich, May of 2012. Bayern at home. Chelsea were battered for 90 minutes, but refused to die. Drogba equalized in the 88th. Penalties again, this time no slip. Drogba scored the winner. Chelsea were champions of Europe. It was the greatest moment in the club's history. But at Chelsea, even fairy tales come with a deadline. A few months later, Di Matteo was gone. Chelsea had reached the peak of the mountain and were already tumbling down the other side. Now, you see, Chelsea had conquered Europe. The one trophy Roman Abramovich wanted more than anything was finally theirs, but instead of stability, it triggered another storm. The Champions League should have been the start of an era. Instead, it became the end of one. By the start of 2013, Roberto Di Matteo was gone, replaced by Rafa Benitez, a man Chelsea fans hated before he even arrived. The protests were loud, the banners were vicious, and the atmosphere was toxic. But somehow, Benitez managed to win the Europa League. Chelsea became the first club in history to hold the Champions League and Europa League titles at the same time. It was impressive, but it didn't matter. Abramovich still wanted something else. So in the summer of 2013, he brought back the man he once let go. Jose Mourinho. The special one returned. This time, Mourinho called himself the happy one. He said he was older, calmer, wiser, but he was still the same Jose, obsessed with control, with dominance, with winning at all costs. And for a while it worked. He rebuilt the team, brought in Diego Costa, Cesc Fabregas, and Thibaut Courtois. Chelsea started to look ruthless again. In 2015 they won the Premier League and the League Cup. But the pattern at Chelsea never changed. Build, win, implode. The following season, the chaos returned. A feud with the club doctor, dressing room tension, Mourinho losing the players. By December, the defending champions were sitting in 16th place, 1 point above relegation. Mourinho was sacked again. Then Chelsea got Guus Hiddink again, another caretaker. Chelsea finished mid-table and missed European competition entirely. That's when Antonio Conte showed up, a coach with energy, passion, and tactics built on discipline. Conte switched Chelsea to a back three, a move that changed the Premier League overnight. Victor Moses became a wing-back. David Luiz was reborn. Eden Hazard and Diego Costa tore through defenses. Chelsea went on a 13-match winning streak, 93 points. Champions again in 2017. But tension returned. Conte clashed with the board over transfers. He wanted Van Dijk and Alex Sandro. He got Drinkwater and Zappacosta. By the next summer, it was war. After 2 seasons, Conte was gone. Abramovich replaced him with Maurizio Sarri. His Sarri ball football brought Chelsea back to beautiful possession-based play. 1 season, 1 Europa League title, 1 top 4 finish. Then he was gone too. Chelsea were changing managers faster than they could hang new trophies. And yet somehow they kept winning. That's the paradox of Chelsea Football Club. No continuity, no stability, just chaos and silverware hand in hand. But all of that was about to be tested like never before, because the next chapter wasn't about tactics or managers. It was about politics, and it would bring the Abramovich era crashing to an end. By 2021, Chelsea were back at the top. Thomas Tuchel had come in, organized the chaos, and within a few months, he delivered the one thing Abramovich had been chasing for nearly 20 years, a second Champions League. May of 2021, Porto. Kai Havertz scored to make Chelsea champions of Europe again. But then, the world changed. In February of 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Sanctions began to hit Russian billionaires, and before long, Roman Abramovich's name was on the list. The government froze his assets. Chelsea's accounts were locked. The club couldn't sell tickets or merchandise, and they couldn't sign players. Overnight, one of football's biggest clubs became a hostage to politics. Abramovich announced he would sell the club, insisting all proceeds would go to charity. But to fans, it was the end of an era. The Roman Empire had fallen. In May of 2022, Chelsea were sold to a new consortium led by Todd Boehly and Clearlake Capital for £4.25 billion, the biggest deal in sports history at the time. The moment was supposed to be a new beginning. Fresh ideas, fresh money, a new identity. But Chelsea have never been a club that handles change well. And within a year, everything would go up in flames. When Todd Boehly took over Chelsea, he promised evolution. He said he wanted to build a modern, data-driven football club. But what followed didn't look like a plan. It looked like panic. The spending started immediately, and it never stopped. In the first year alone, Chelsea spent over £600 million. Enzo Fernandez, Mykhailo Mudryk, Wesley Fofana, Benoit Badiashile, João Felix on loan, and then in the summer, Moises Caicedo for a British record fee. Fans called it Football Manager in real life. Of course, rival fans called it madness. And maybe they were both right, because on the pitch it didn't make any sense. Thomas Tuchel, the man who had just won them the Champions League, was sacked in September of 2022, just 7 games into the season. Boehly wanted a new vision. He brought in Graham Potter from Brighton, a calm, methodical coach. But Potter walked straight into a storm. 50 players in the squad, no balance, no direction, new signings arriving every week. He tried to keep it together, but Chelsea spiraled out of control. They finished 12th in the league, their worst position in nearly 30 years. Potter was sacked before the end of the season. Frank Lampard came back in as caretaker, but nostalgia couldn't save them. Over £1 billion spent, no trophies, no Champions League, no identity. The idea was to build a team for the future, but the reality was a collection of young players with no leadership. For the first time in decades, Chelsea didn't just lose games, they looked ordinary. The club that once defined chaos as a winning formula had finally found chaos without the trophies. And as 2024 began, people weren't just asking, when will Chelsea win again? They were asking, what even is Chelsea anymore? By the start of 2024, Chelsea had become a punchline. How do you spend £1 billion and get worse? How do you have 2 teams worth of players and still finish mid-table? But quietly, something was starting to shift. Todd Boehly had taken a step back from football decisions. The chaos of the first year forced him to bring in people who actually knew the sport. Lawrence Stewart and Paul Winstanley took control of recruitment. The board finally stopped chasing hype and started thinking about balance. Then came Enzo Maresca, a calm, tactical mind who had just taken Leicester back to the Premier League. He wasn't a flashy name, but for the first time in a long time, Chelsea picked a manager with a plan and gave him time to follow it. Under Maresca, the style changed completely. Chelsea stopped playing like strangers. They started keeping the ball, controlling games, suffocating opponents with possession. Enzo Fernandez looked like a leader again. Cole Palmer became the face of the rebuild. Malo Gusto and Levi Colwill found confidence. Even Mudryk started to look settled. Well, that was before his whole incident. It wasn't perfect, but the progress was visible. By December of 2024, Chelsea were climbing the table again. They went unbeaten for 12 games in all competitions. Stamford Bridge felt alive again. Then the moment that changed everything. The Conference League final in Wrocław, Poland. Chelsea versus Real Betis. 2 goals from Cole Palmer that night, and for the first time since 2021, Chelsea lifted a European trophy. It wasn't the Champions League, but it meant more than people think. It was proof that the club could still win. Proof that the rebuild was working. A few weeks later, they traveled to United States for the FIFA Club World Cup, going all the way to the finals and beating Paris Saint-Germain 3-0 to claim another trophy, and became the first and only club ever to win every single trophy available to them. Suddenly, all those young players that once looked lost were now growing together. Enzo and Caicedo were running midfields, and nobody was talking about their price tags anymore. Palmer was scoring goals for fun. Maresca was giving the team something they had lacked for years: purpose. By the summer of 2025, Chelsea were back in the Champions League. Not as a super team, not as a financial powerhouse, but as a project finally starting to make sense. It wasn't the chaos of Mourinho, it wasn't the glory of Drogba, but it was something Chelsea fans had forgotten how to feel. Hope.